we see that it is said that forward-thinking energy companies must drive ESG from the top, and we did see that with Deji telling us how much the Apex law in Nigeria does attempt to do that. Now, as company secretary and legal counsel, you are the focal point of governance in the company. And how do you influence and indeed encourage your company or any other company to be more ESG compliant? Thank you.
Thank you, Marilyn. Like you said, the company secretary is the focal point. I think we as company secretaries were the chief compliance officer, so we have to be the champions of the governance in the ESG. And of course, we have to champion not just the governance portion, but also compliance with environmental and social related policies. So I think the first step is having the right policies in place, which Nathan touched on. So you have to, as a company secretary, make sure you have the right policies touching every aspect of ESG that is relevant to your business. And it's not just having, like you said, having the right policies in place is a good first step, but you have to go a bit further. You have to make sure that you are training your board, training employees on the policies you've put in place, training your third-party vendors, your contractors, because their ESG performance is critical to your business. They're your contractors, so if anything goes wrong from an ESG perspective, it's you, the regulator, is going to look to as the first port of call, and as the you would be the one subject to the sanctions and not necessarily the contractor. So you have to make sure that you are training everyone on what policies you have in place. And some of the key policies that we have put in place, at least within my organization, we've put in several ESG related policies, but I'll just speak briefly on a few of them. We have child and forced labor policy, which is to ensure that we as an organization are make it clear that we're completely opposed to child and forced labor, and make it clear to our contractors that it's also the same expectation from them. So our contractors, before we sign up any contractor, we have to make sure they're fully aware of the policy and they're going to adhere to it, and they confirm that there's no child or forced labor policies within the organization. We have a code of conduct, business and ethics, which is just an overall framework which sets out the tone of the organization towards governance and compliance with policies. We have a related policy, related parties policy, which is to guard against related party transactions, which the company is unaware of and which could sort of be adverse to the company's business. We have a gifts and benefits declaration policy, which is to ensure that we are not, as employees, we're not exposing ourselves to any possible potential conflict of interest with our contractors or with our vendors. We have an anti-corruption policy, which is to ensure that we're completely compliant with anti-corruption laws and requirements. We have a blacklisting policy. I know in certain within certain countries, blacklisting is sort of frowned on. But I think for us, we feel if a contractor is not ESG compliant or is not performing the way we expect the contractor to perform, then we have to be able to blacklist that policy, because we don't want to blacklist that vendor. We don't want the vendor to expose us to any sanctions or any adverse consequences for our business or to our reputation. We have our CSR policy, because we view the society within which we operate as very key. So we have a policy which sort of sets out what we're going to do on CSR. And of course, it's not like we said earlier, putting the right policies in place is a first step, but you need to do more. I've talked about training, but there also needs to be, you have to ensure there's enforcement, and that has to be enforcement across board. There can't be any preference for any contractor or for any staff, no matter how senior. If there's a breach of any ESG policy, then you as a company secretary, you have to make sure that you are enforcing that breach of policy, because the easiest way for policies to get ignored is if there's preferential treatment for anyone. we think it's also key to have a whistleblowing policy and a whistleblowing hotline in place, because quite often employees, if they've noticed any ESG breaches, they should, the first port of call would generally be to the company secretary, but they might want to report anonymously. I know there's always the fear of sanctions if you whistleblow. So if you want to ensure proper governance frameworks in place, then you have to have a whistleblowing hotline, which will allow your employees to report any breaches of policy anonymously and ensure that the breach can be investigated and dealt with without the employee facing any sanctions. Nathan talked about communications. I think it's very key that we are constantly communicating what policies we have in place, what the policies say, and what the benefits of those ESG policies are. So always, from time to time, we try to send out communications to the organizations, like little snippets of our various policies, just to keep them aware of what the policies are, and always have those at the back of their mind. So sort of drive a compliance culture from there. If they see a snippet, then it's very likely they will then go and read the whole policy and be completely familiar with the policy. And then from the contractual aspect, we've made sure that all our agreements with any third-party vendors always have in place ESG provisions on them. So we have anti-bribery, anti-corruption provisions, which typically would allow us to terminate if there's a breach of those provisions. We have and we've made that a standard in all our templates, and we try to ensure that all our contractors, when they sign up, they know that governance is very, very important to us, and will not tolerate any ESG breaches. And then I think a very key way you can drive a compliance culture from an ESG perspective is through performance management. Actually, I think if you make it a part of the employee's assessment or appraisal that they have to comply with ESG requirements, then that forces them from a performance perspective to take ESG very seriously. And as a corporate as well, if you have a scorecard, it should be a balanced scorecard where it's not just about revenue performance, but ESG performance is also critical. And that way, the whole organization is driven towards a shared goal of good ESG performance. So those are some of the key ways as a company secretary we can drive a ESG compliance organization.
Thank you so much, Tuyo. Thank you very much. That was very helpful. Our guest of honor, you are permitted to leave, ma. I know that you have another meeting around now, so please, you are excused, ma. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate your presence.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm very grateful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you
very much. Let me jump to you, Akideji, because I know you advise. I know you advise some of the biggest players in the energy market, so I think you're better placed to answer this question. No pressure. Practically speaking, what strategies can companies adopt to mitigate ESG-related risk? So we've heard a lot about the benefits of ESG, but there are definitely risks, and some of these risks have come up in the course of our discussions. So what would you advise energy companies and people in this sector? Over to you, Akideji.
Thank you very much, Doc. Being a lawyer, I think the first advice would be ensure that you adhere to the provisions of the law. Try to comply with provisions of the PIA, comply with other laws that you may be subject to. In addition to that, there are numerous corporate governance codes and rules, either from an SEC perspective, if you are a public company, or from a listing perspective, and then generally from the FRCM perspective. Many of these corporate governance codes have provisions relating to sustainability and ESG. So it will be good to comply with those, because those, in essence, help mitigate the risks that may flow from ESG issues. Generally, like every good businessman, try to carry along your communities within which you are engaging businesses. have a good CSR program that is clear and that leads to impact within the community and is free of any anti-bribery and corruption issues. Make sure that you have good boards. The board is, the composition is very good. Their relevant committees are well set up and they meet frequently, at least 4 times a year, so that once a quarter they have hands-on issues as experience as it relates to the ongoing affairs of the business. Make sure that you from time to time do internal audits to identify those key risks that may be affecting your business and keep updating them, because I mean law and policy and regulation is not static. Things tend to change from time to time, so make sure those audits are done more frequently so that you keep updating as time goes by. Make sure that, as Toyo has mentioned, you have very strong policies that are ESG centric. You have strong reporting lines that people would have confidence in following and adhering to. You have whistleblowers avenues so that people can issue, make any whistleblow anonymously, and they are sure that they won't be witch hunted. So those are general ways that you can help mitigate these risks. As we know, ESG is not static; it keeps improving and changing as the day goes by. So you as well have to adapt as a company. Many of the things that we rate as important today, 20 years ago, were not. So you need to keep adapting to time and to change. Thank you, Doc.
Thank you very much, Deji. Thank you for giving us a checklist of what companies can do. Now back to you, Nathan. You work for a global energy company and may have advice in these lines. Do you have any suggestions on what energy companies can do when things go wrong? Thank you.
Thanks, Marilyn. And we need to, as I've said before, plan for those worst case incidents. But having advised clients when a major incident happens, it's so important not only that they've planned for it, but that they have the right stakeholders in the room to make the decisions. And it comes back to what the professor was talking about in his opening presentation about the tensions. We think about the legal risk. Often in these, we've got a major incident, there are multiple parties, there's a question of blame and fault, but often that's not the most pressing issues. You need to think about your legal risks, but you also need to take into account things like reputational risk, financial risk, but also the social risk and those other stakeholders that are important. And there is often a tension between trying to work together to resolve some of the immediate problems whilst keeping one eye on the longer term picture. And I think those companies that manage it well are able to look at things in the short term and not let the necessarily always the longer term, who's to blame, who's to fault, what will blame and fault be if I act decisively now. And that can be managed, but it's about having the voices in the room, not just the financial and the legal, although those are very important, but also the reputational and the broader social or stakeholder voice, and being able to come up with a coordinated strategy that takes on board the advice you're getting. Because often, as lawyers, you're asked to advise just on the legal part, but there are those other aspects, and working with advisors who can see, as it were, the full picture and appreciate those risks from an ESG perspective as well, is how I've seen companies who have done well in those difficult circumstances where you have a major incident that you need to deal with.
Thank you so much, Nathan. By the way, please send in your questions. I can see a couple of questions have already come in, and I would read one or two of them. But please, like I said, it's not every time you have the opportunity to have professionals give you advice without charging you very big bills. So please take advantage of it as much as you can. I have a couple of questions here, and I think, Nathan, let me go back to you. One of the questions looks like it should be for you, hopefully. So the question is, what are some of the factors and international best practices to have in mind when devising a governance framework? Is that for you, or should we be going to somebody else?
I'm happy to take that. I think it needs to be a risk-led process. So each business is different. It's going to have different risks. There are going to be some risks which are common across businesses. So the anti-child slavery and the anti-bribery and corruption, and those ones, there are relatively standard forms on how, and guidance on on how to incorporate those provisions into contracts. But you also need to think about what industry specific or market specific risks you're facing, because each firm has finite resources, and it's really important that from a governance perspective, you're spending the most time and focus on those risks that are biggest and most likely to impact your business. So it's really about understanding the environment in which you're operating. So it's so critical, I think, for the lawyers to talk to the business to see where the business needs the risks are, and then to look at at international best practice, at industry best practice, and often depending on the industry you're working in, there'll be guidance from industry bodies on some of these issues that are common to the sector.
Thank you so much, Nathan. I thought I was going to trip you there, but it looks like you handled it very well. I have a question for you, Akideji. I think you are better placed to deal with this question. And it has to do with the multiple laws and regulations in Nigeria's ESG space. So the question is, how do we deal with these multiple laws?
Okay. Yes. I would admit that there are multiple laws. You see the Climate Change Act, you see the Petroleum Industry Act, you hear the Nigerian Energy Transition Plan. So there are different laws, the EIA, Environmental Impact Assessment Act, the NOSTRA. There are numerous laws. Without trying to advertise, I think the first thing you need to do is have a good lawyer, have good external counsel that provide routine advice as it relates to the laws that generally regulate ESG, particularly in your business. Also ensure that you hire or employ a good general counsel who has significant skills to advise the company internally on those numerous laws that currently govern or regulate ESG in Nigeria. And continue to engage your external counsel. I think that's the most important part, so that we can remain in business. And as frankly speaking, I mean, we as a firm provide that service to numerous clients where there's legal and regulatory watch. One, to keep advising on the existing laws, and also any proposed bills in the National Assembly or in the State House Assembly that may affect your business. So it's good to have strong lawyers working with you.
I like that last point, because like you said, that's the only way to stay in business. We have these bills to pay. But on a more serious note, I found in my experience that many of the clients that I deal with, they come up with a timeline of some sort on a quarterly basis, on a biannual basis, where they get external counsel to stay on job. So apart from the fact that we need to eat and stay in business, I think there's also the benefit for the company, definitely. Professor Amaechi, I can see your hands. Oh, we're running out of time, but I think we should definitely take your input.
Yeah, so as a non-lawyer here, I mean, listen to your colleagues, and I mean, you tend to present a very sanitized view of reality. And I deal a lot with companies, especially with their strategy on sustainability. And one of the things I come across is that lawyers are also part of the problem. I think we need to recognize that. So especially when it comes to things like sustainability reporting, where the lawyers will not allow the reports to go out because they want to scrutinize everything there. That in itself is a problem, and we need to recognize that. So, but when we talk about all these nice things we are doing, in reality, that's not true. And if all these things were true, then Nigeria will be, or Africa will be, where we want it to be. But we know that there are challenges. We know there are corruptions. Companies are involved, and most of the time, lawyers are involved, right? So I think we need to move away from this idea of sanitizing it and present the tension inherent, because companies are on an everyday basis faced with the pressures of profit making. And we can't just sit down here and just think about these nice things to have without recognizing the tension. And then you asked a question about the laws and the conflict, the plethora of laws. I would say, let's go back to culture. If your culture is right and you're thinking about positive and negative impact, irrespective of the law thrown at you, because those laws, if you look at each of them, they are about minimizing negative impact and enhancing positive impact. And once you tap into that culture, no law would frighten you in any way.
Thank you for chastising us, Prof. Take our chastisement in good faith.
And I must say that most ESG ideals, they are more of aspirational, and a forum like this is just trying to get people up to speed for what they should be doing. So perhaps you're not saying it as it is, but what we ought to be doing. That's the goal. Yes, so I think we can do with one more question. I didn't see one on the chat box. Yeah, so I think the question is talking about the interplay between risk and opportunity. Yeah, so I think this question should go to Toyo. It says that calling on the company secretary or governance practitioner, the interplay between risk and opportunity calls on the company secretary to either mitigate the risk or seize the opportunity, as the case may be. So as a company secretary, how do you balance, now the question, how do you balance ESG with your commercial objectives? I think it crosses with what Prof is trying to say, that the reality is commercial. How do we balance this tension? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think from my perspective, and I know maybe Prof might disagree, but I think there's not that much of they're not really fighting against each other to a great extent. So I think we've found that if you don't take into account ESG, and if you're not focused on sustainability, you might make your profits for today, but you have to think long term. Is your company going to be, if you are the CEO, for example, is the company going to survive you in 5-10 years time if all the focus of the organization is on maximizing opportunities? I think it might work in the short term, but in the long term, you're going to find that company is it's not going to be there in 10 years time. So from the way we look at it is that, yes, you balance it, but the way to balance it is to be conscious of the fact that ESG is actually what is going to drive your organization forward on a long-term basis. You have to think of sustainability. You have to think of the generation of the future. So if you're not focused on governance, for example, you are going to find that your company could face some huge reputational damage that it doesn't survive. If you're not focused on the environment, if you're an oil and gas company, let's say you ignore environmental issues, there's an oil spill, you could face sanctions from NOSRA that will completely wipe out the business. So yes, you focus on the opportunities, but you absolutely have to be completely focused on ESG. If not, your business, which you think you're running profitably, that all those profits could be wiped away by just one single incident. So I think there has to be an absolute focus on ESG, and then focusing on ESG, you're actually also helping the business from a revenue perspective. That's the way I look at it.
Thank you so much for I see some questions. I think they are comments, more or less comments from the chat box. I'll just read it out. So this is from Shola Iframe Oluanuga. It says, indeed, ESG runs the strategic and operational realms of corporate organizations. This is a good step forward for ICSAN and the members. Hopefully, ESG will continue to promote human rights aspects of governance, particularly in the third generation rights. Thank you. So I also see another comment from Tene, which says, hi, thank you for an insightful conversation. ESG seems to also be treated from a global UN and regional scale, EU. Is there any awareness to replicate same in Africa or West African energy space? So the question is coming at the end. I'll just repeat the question. Are there awareness to replicate ESG, and Africa-centric ESG policies? I think that's where the question is going to, or West Africa-centric ESG policy. And I'll just throw this question open to any of our panelists that feel they can answer this. Perhaps, Prof. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very good point. Most of the things we do at the moment, I mean, if you look at the frameworks, they have all been developed outside Africa. The nearest might be the King's Report from South Africa, but others are to a large extent developed external. So the African Union talks about the Agenda 2063. So the Africa we want. Maybe that's the good starting point for those who are also interested in ESG from an African perspective. We tend to reference frameworks like the GRI or the one on climate finance. But if we also in our reports and reflections begin to look at some of these African frameworks like the AU Agenda 2063, might be a good way to help us contextualize this from an African perspective. But there's nothing there at the moment. And it's also an opportunity for organizations like yours to probably work with academia and other think tanks to see how we can create something that is for Africa. Because one thing that is missing in the conversation is that, like I said earlier, we know what we don't want, but we don't know what we want, especially when it comes to ESG.
Thank you so much, Prof.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you very much. I think before we close up, I'm mindful that we're running out of time. Should we take 30 seconds remarks from each of the panelists just to close up the session? Just 30 seconds, I'll be timing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Who wants to go first? Prof, would you go first? 30 seconds, sir.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm happy we had this conversation and that lawyers are taking this on board. I've written a couple of papers with lawyers. You guys are very interesting and I like how you think. And I know that if you take sustainability seriously as you're trying to, it will help to mainstream it in Nigeria. So I can only say congratulations and encourage your members to key into this conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Prof. Nathan, 30 seconds.
Yeah, I think, again, it's to remember that ESG is not a destination, it's a journey. And so it's a continuing conversation. And I think it's one that we will continue to be having and boards will continue to be having over the years ahead as we seek to really improve and develop ESG policies.
So we should have a second session. Tuyo, 30 seconds.
Thank you to ICSAN for arranging this. I think it's very critical that we as an organization and as a country and society at large, we're completely focused on ESG initiatives, because those are critical to driving the economy forward, to driving business forward, and to ensuring sustainability of business and the environment in which we live in. So it's a great initiative, and I look forward to us continuing to pursue ESG as an organization.
Thank you, Tuyo. Last but definitely not the least, Akindeji.
Thank you, Doc. For me, what more can I say? The panelists have all said it all. ESG is a journey, not a destination. So we continue to work on this. Thanks to ICSAN for organizing this. We hope other professional organizations like ICSAN will continue to have forum like this, where these types of discussions will continue to improve generally doing business and sustainability in Nigeria? Thank you very much.
Since you've all said that it's a journey and not a destination, I hope if we call you again, you would definitely jump on this opportunity, please. Over to you, Marilyn.
Thank you. It's taking you on the next webinar. Hopefully, there's a yes from you. So we've come to almost the end of the program, and thank you. It's a fantastic turnout. It's over 200 people online, and at this point, we would like to do our vote of thanks, and I do have my vice chairman, who is Idoya Sit or Konetuk, to the vote of thanks. Idoya Sit, opposite. Over to you, please. Thank you. Is he muted?
He's muted. Can we unmute?
Idoya Sit is here.
Can you try and find the man? Please.
ITO.
ITO. That's
Yeah, it needs to mute.
No,
Yeah.
ask it. Just click ask it.
Okay, hello. Can everybody hear me? A very warm welcome and afternoon to all of us. My name is Idoya Konetuk, the Vice Chairman of Ixon Energy Sectorial Group. It is my privilege to propose the vote of thanks speech and acknowledge every contribution made today to make today's program a huge success. From here on, I speak on behalf of the Energy Sectorial Group. We would like to thank God for His blessings, grace, and opportunity concerning today's event. We extend a hearty vote of thanks to our guest of honor, Mrs. Constance Harry Onukuha, Member Board of Director, NNPC Limited. We are grateful to you, Ma, for sparing the time from your busy schedule to grace this occasion. Today, we had an opportunity to be educated by you. We are grateful to the Institute of the Chartered Secretaries and Administrators of Nigeria, ICSAN, for the platform to contribute to the enhancements of the status and practice of corporate governance, especially as it has to do today with ESG and PIA 2021. We are especially thankful to the council members of the Institute for painstakingly ensuring the fluidity of the Institute. To our principal officers, the President and Chairman of Council, Mr. Taiwo Owukalade, FCIS, the Vice President, Mrs. Funmi Ekundayo, FCIS, the Treasurer, Mr. Francis Oluwade, FCIS, the immediate past President, Mr. Boda Ayeku, FCIS, and the Registrar, CEO, Mrs. Taiwo Olusesi. We say a big thank you. We are immensely thankful to the panelists who, from their wealth of knowledge and experience, have done justice to the subject of discussion. No stone was left unturned by the wonderful panelists. Thank you, Professor Kenneth Amese. Thank you, Nathan Siri. Thank you to you, Eyuchechi. Thank you, Mr. Adedije Oyebode, and in absentia, Mr. Kehinde Ojua. Please expect our invitation next time. Special thanks to the ICSAN Secretariat and IT and technical team. Permit us to mention the Senior Manager Operations, Mr. Ojeji, a few members of the IT team, Mustafa and Juliet. What do we say to our moderators? We are equally thankful for the excellent coordination and moderation of today's webinar. A special thanks to our sectorial chair for doubling as a moderator today, Mrs. Marilyn Eze, FCIS. Also our thanks to Dr. Ademola Bambuse. To a group of people that made all the difference, the participants, we say a big thank you to you. Your attendance today justified every effort made to put this program together. We hope you had a rewarding engagement. Thank you very much. And remember that you are always welcome. And last but not least, a mighty thanks to the members of the Ixon Energy Sectorial Group. To our chair again, Mrs. Mary Lineze, FCIS, Cheta, Akumufela, Tommy, Olumayowa, Akila, Temidayo, Amazon, Wola, Counselor, and to my good servitors. From all of us to all of you, we say thank you and God bless.
Thank you so much, Vice Chair.
Thank you so much, every participant online. It's been fantastic having you, and it's really this topic. I'm sure everyone learned a lot. I did. Did you?
I did. Thank you so much. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you. I'll see you. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.